Well, Toronto's police chief has launched an investigation after an officer wrote a letter criticizing Toronto Mayor John Tory. This over the recent shootings in the city. The letter signed by Sergeant Mark Hayward calls Tory a direct contributor to the shootings. Hayward says the mayor supported cancelling a specialized policing unit back in 2016. He also criticizes recent budget cuts made to the city's police service. So what solutions are there to combat this wave of gun violence? Joining us right now in Toronto is City Councillor Vincent Crisanti, and joining us from Surrey, BC is Surrey City Councillor Mike Starchuk. Thank you to the two of you for joining us today. Councillor Crisanti, I want to begin with you, and the question many people in Toronto are asking. Why is this happening? And as I ask that question, I want to talk about that letter that we began this segment with, widely talked about today in Toronto, the criticism from the veteran officer. Now, this is what was written in the email, and I have to say this was reported by Global News as well as 680 News in Toronto. Quote, "You enjoyed a relatively safe city while police were engaged in proactive activities, intercepting and disrupting gang activity. Since this came to an end in 2016, we have seen a steady and dramatic increase in gun violence and are faced with a homicide rate that is on track to set a new record for Toronto." So again, that email being reported on, not very pleasant words for the city mayor, John Tory. Do you think the Tory administration has contributed to the gun violence that we are seeing here by the policies that they have chosen?
Michael, I think this underscores the importance of listening to our frontline officers. So I agree with a number of things that have been already put out there. I think one of the things that I've been advocating for now for a couple of years is actually the elimination of the hiring freeze. I think the hiring should have been managed internally right from the outset. One thing that you don't do, Michael, is you don't tell the gangs and you don't tell the bad guys that you're not going to be hiring officers anymore for at least 3 years. So what's happened since then clearly is we've lost close to 800 officers over a period of time. We're just in a very reactive mode now. We no longer have officers doing community work on a sustainable basis in communities, particularly where they're needed, like communities like mine. So I'm advocating for to bring community officers back in communities and to make that happen yesterday. And it hasn't been happening. I've been asking for it. I've spoken to Mayor Tory, I've spoken to Chief Saunders, and they seem to be towing the line and staying steady on the course that they're in now, while these shootings continue to escalate and continue to spike. And so I, as you know, put in an emergency motion requesting an emergency meeting to begin to find answers that we could implement now to begin to reverse this.
So you definitely see a direct correlation between decisions made on an administrative level and the violence that we're seeing on Toronto streets?
Well, I do. I think when you're in charge and you're a leader, then you got to show that leadership. It's like you're a captain of a ship and you see the ship steering into an iceberg. What are you going to do? Well, let's see what happens. Let's stay the course. Things are not good in the city of Toronto right now. You know, I look at the community I represent. They don't feel safe. They want us to do something, and not just to talk about doing something, but they want us to do something now. I've put proposals out in terms of what we could do immediately and what needs to be done more in the long term. And I'm talking about those things. I've talked about it. I've put more than a dozen communications out over the last 2 or 3 years.
Let me jump in there, Councillor. I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to bring in Councillor Starchuk here from Surrey. Because Councillor Starchuk, you recently, along with the City of Surrey, released recommendations on how to fight violent crime in your city. You were on the Mayor's Task Force on Gang Violence Prevention. What were the top recommendations in that report for you?
There was a number of recommendations. There was actually 6 recommendations that were out there, and what we found was in the city of Surrey and in the province of BC, the gang lifestyle is a little bit different. It comes from all walks of life. It's not generally poverty driven. It can come from very affluent families. And one of the things that we've been able to take a look at is that there needs to be early intervention, and we need to create a smart table for those youth that are out there that have got themselves involved with this, that have been identified to find the services that are out there. And we also need to get out there as far as the education system. One of the important parts that was revealed from the studies that were done in British Columbia shows that the average age of a person with a gang lifestyle is about 23 years old. and that person probably had an interaction of an arrest at the age of 16, and was probably expelled at a school at the age of 13. So now we know that from the ages of 6 to 13, those are the ages that we need to start concentrating on, and to let people know that the gang lifestyle is not the lifestyle of choice.
So early intervention, as you say, but as we heard from Councillor Crisanti, there are people, for example, in Toronto that believe that some of the violence here has to do with budget cuts. How much of the recommendations that have been put forward in this report are contingent on more money being invested in intervention from having these crimes happen in the first place?
Yeah, and that's a good point to be made, because with regards to what's happening here in the city of Surrey, since 2016, we've added about 128 more officers into the program, and with regards to our Surrey gang enforcement team, we've just doubled that. So we know that there's going to be a lot of resources that will be put into that part of things as far as the early intervention of everything that's going to take place. So yes, the resources, the money's there. Part of the committee that was structured was all levels of government, all levels of policing, and the community that was out there. And so there's a strong message that says we've taken a look at various models that are out there in North America, and we found ones that are going to come forward.
Now, I realize that Surrey is very different than Toronto, that the issues of one city is not necessarily directly translatable to the other. But based on your experiences, I do want to do a little bit of an exercise here. And I'm going to begin with you, Councillor Crisanti. I'm going to ask you to talk about some of the solutions that you have put forward to try to address this violence. And then from you, Councillor Starchuk, after the councillor in Toronto speaks, perhaps you can perhaps provide some of your insight, what you think of those proposed solutions. So, Councillor Crisanti, I'll begin with you.
Yes, okay, well, thank you. So I think one of the first things that I've been advocating for now, as I indicated earlier, is to put community officers back into communities. These are trained officers that have the right people skills, and to do this in a sustainable way, I mean over a number of years, the 3, 4, 5 years, and this way they begin to nurture relationships, and as through nurturing those relationships, information flows and those communities become safer. I mean, in terms of longer term things, I think we also need to put community officers, SROs, back into schools. So the school board made a mistake in their recent decision to take officers out of schools.
And I should just quickly clarify, SRO, yes. Security Resource Officer in the high schools, in the schools of the City of Toronto.
Correct. So, so we need to put SROs back, these officers back into schools, and also I think more for longer term. There's a gap clearly. The gangs are getting to our young, our young folks before we can do anything about it. So we need to close that gap, and I'm looking to do that by beefing up our outreach program through the City of Toronto. I've had discussions already with staff at the City of Toronto to ensure that we have a much stronger outreach program that will get to our young people before the gangs get to them. And of course, we need to also do everything we can to ensure that we have all the programming in place, jobs. And I'm one of the only councillors, by the way, that hosts 2 regular business roundtables every year. And I do that because I know the importance of ensuring that we create jobs and that jobs are available for our young people. So and that's longer term, but the immediate solutions are to ensure that we have boots on the ground, community officers working those communities, and we need to do that right away, and it can be done, and I just don't understand why it's not getting done.
Let me jump in there because we're running out of time. Councillor Starchuk, it sounds like he is echoing what your report was suggesting.
Yes, I have to agree with the Toronto councillor with regards to having more resources in the schools. In Surrey, we have what's called a wraparound program, and it functions within our RCMP, which is, it's a federal force, along with the liaisons that are in the school that recognize these people, and they provide the tools to support them from, going into that gang lifestyle that's there. And so we know that we have to reach out to those people that are there. And one of the other things that would be just slightly different is that in some of our elementary schools, where we're talking that 6 to 13 age, that we need to provide some after-school programming. We need to make sure that when the school day is finished and there may not be anybody at home to monitor or supervise them, that we're giving them some activities that are keeping them out of that lifestyle that's there. So I agree with what the other councillor was saying. in the sense that we need to have more of a focus on seeing what the problem is and addressing it before it becomes a greater problem.
I only have a minute left, so 30 seconds to each of you, because I do want to ask this question. And Councillor Starchuk, I'll begin with you. You know, Canadian cities, or Canadians like to think our cities are safer than what we see south of the border. And statistically, we have to say Canadian cities are safer. But has that created a false sense of comfort and perhaps political complacency?
I guess the thing that I like to say is in the province of BC, whether you're a town of 6,000 or a town of 600,000, nobody is immune to the gang violence that's out there and the shootings that are there. And we recently had a rally in Surrey that was called Wake Up. And it was to wake up the politicians, it was to wake up the community leaders, it was to wake up the individuals and families and friends, and to take a look at this. I'm just glad that we were out in front of this and had the report that was ready to come out 3rd of July so that we can address all of those things that were there. The tragic events that took place early in June, they can't go for naught. We have to make sure that what we're doing keeps coming forward.
And Councillor Crisanti, very quickly from you, are we suffering from political complacency on this issue?
I think, Michael, that describes it very, very precisely. I think there is political complacency right now. Look, just recently we've had 2 back-to-back deadly weekends. You know, a couple of weekends ago, 5 people dead in the city, in our city streets. 3 of them from the area that I represent alone. The following Canada Day long weekend, 11 shootings and 3 more people dead. So, you know, how many, and then of course the stray bullets hitting these innocent children not too long ago. So how many of these incidents have to happen before we wake up, take notice, and begin to make immediate decisions? And this is where leadership comes in. So, and this is what I'm advocating for and pushing for. We need to change things now and put community officers back into communities amongst doing a number of other things that I've already indicated.